let's move on to Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley scored the coveted Koch brothers endorsement yesterday when the conservative group Americans for Prosperity came out and gave her their seal of approval in the 2024 presidential election. We can go ahead and put the first element up on the screen here. So this is a headline from the New York Times. Koch Network endorses Nikki Haley in bid to push GOP past Trump. All right, Ryan, this is actually pretty interesting. Let's roll DeSantis's reaction here. This is another tear sheet. The DeSantis camp reacted by putting out a press release immediately that said the DeSantis campaign congratulates Donald Trump on securing the Koch endorsement. Congrats to Donald Trump on securing the Koch endorsement. Like clockwork, the pro-open borders, pro-jailbreak bill establishment is lining up behind a moderate who has no mathematical pathway of defeating the former president. Every dollar spent on Nikki Haley's candidacy should be reported as an in-kind to the Trump campaign. That's from the DeSantis comms director, Andrew Romeo. And I will add, Ryan, it is pretty interesting for a couple of reasons. One, it's a Pete, Amy 2020 move. It's an attempt to consolidate the field because in a state like New Hampshire and actually even in Iowa, if you put together the anti-Trump votes for other candidates, that will generally, in polling, that means Trump will have a much harder time. You don't have Trump over that 50% threshold in early states. So if you can consolidate the votes, then you can have this like last gasp attempt to get in and potentially undermine Trump. Nikki Haley is a hawk. The Kochs are not.
Right.
Americans for Prosperity and Stand Together, the broader Koch network, are not hawkish on foreign policy. They have this very sort of traditional libertarian approach to foreign policy and to immigration, as the DeSantis campaign slammed the pro-open borders Americans for Prosperity. And that brings me to the third point, which is that this is highly sort of unusual, but not in any way surprising, because over the course of the last 10 years, Americans for Prosperity went from being a really consensus celebrated Tea Party group to being what now is decried by one of the leading presidential campaigns as pro-open borders, blah, blah, blah.
The DeSantis campaign seemed quite salty there. Were they hoping that they were going to get the Koch endorsement?
I don't think so. And I actually don't think anybody really wants it. But on the other hand, the New York Times lays out how it could be helpful for Nikki Haley, who has this somewhat of a surge in New Hampshire, where she's basically overtaken DeSantis in some polls in New Hampshire, and she's feels like she's on a surge in states like Iowa, South Carolina. Obviously, now that Tim Scott has dropped out, that's extremely helpful to her in early states. So that comes with AFP's infrastructure. And so the one thing that Nikki Haley didn't have, it doesn't matter that much if the polls are going at, 5 points in one direction or the other if you don't have a ground game. So this matters to the extent that it can give her a ground game. DeSantis really already has that in some of these early states, especially in Iowa.
How did the Koch square the foreign policy question there? Because, do they just don't like Trump so much?
They say
that they'll take someone who's 180 degrees opposite of them when it comes to American adventurism abroad?
I think so. This is a memo. They say, in sharp contrast to recent elections that were dominated by the negative baggage of Donald Trump and in which good candidates lost races that should have been won, Nikki Haley at the top of the ticket would boost candidates up and down the ballot. Haley is, quote, the key independent and moderate voters that Trump has no chance to win. I think that means the key to independent and moderate voters. The moment we require is faced a tested leader with governing judgment and policy experience to pull our nation back from the brink. The country is being ripped apart by extremes on both sides, which basically...
The Kochs are saying that they're upset that there are extremes on both sides after spending the last 3 decades funding the extreme element of the Republican Party.
It's kind of interesting because the extreme...
They're all trying to find who did this?
They're huge. Yeah, they were huge Tea Party funders because in the Tea Party, the question was limited government, quote, limited government. And so their hope was that, I don't think they got behind like a Christine O'Donnell, but, you can find any number of people. Their hope was that these sort of cultural conservatives would keep the social conservatism, the cultural conservatism on the back burner. and would, they would be able to convince people, to do Gang of Eight stuff. They would be able to convince people, and that's a reference to immigration. They'd be able to convince people to do all of the pro-business stuff, get those tax cuts. They got those tax cuts, in fact, by the House and the Senate in 2017. The president, I don't know how much money they put into the presidential election, but they got those tax cuts.
So that's why Trump hates them. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. They got those tax cuts in 2017. So it depends. I mean, they're pro-business extremism. Sure. On other issues, they are totally moderate, which is why it's much more easy for DeSantis to come in now and say, to try to drive a wedge because Nikki Haley has a Koch endorsement. And I actually think running ads connecting Nikki Haley to the pro-open borders Koch Network is not helpful to her whatsoever in Iowa or New Hampshire.
And we also have a very bizarre debate coming up between two people who sort of are running for president. One of them is an official candidate for president, Ron DeSantis, who I think most people have forgotten is kind of still running. Yeah. But he hasn't dropped out.
This is the next element, by the way. From
the other one is Gavin Newsom, who is not an official candidate for president, but I think people kind of take his candidacy at this point more seriously than they take Ron DeSantis's on the other side. Newsom's not going to do anything unless Biden either fades out, decides he's not going to run at the last minute, or drops out. We have like weeks left for that to even be remotely possible. And so to position himself in this kind of war for the kind of second tier position to get with Kamala Harris and with others, there's going to be this debate, I guess. Why are they doing this?
Well, an economist journalist, you just saw that economist element on the screen, the presidential matchup that isn't referring to DeSantis and Newsom. They asked Newsom why people should watch this debate between a presidential candidate and a governor who is not currently running for anything. And he said, quote, "I don't know, they should."
Right.
And
so are they doing this debate or are they not doing this debate?
It's supposed to be on Thursday. Okay. It has been scheduled before, and it has been nixed before. And it's obviously a kind of a question for the RNC, too, if you want one of your presidential candidates participating in this sort of extracurricular debate in the middle of debate season. There's another debate, obviously, coming up next week on the 6th. That's going to be in Tuscaloosa at the University of Alabama. So it's just a strange situation. I don't think anybody really wants it. I'm sure it'll be interesting because Newsom in particular, Newsom in particular is a showman. DeSantis really is not a showman. But if you want to see a clash of the sort of younger standard bearers of the centrist Democrats, I guess he tries to be a sort of progressive in spirit. So if you want to see the clash between a spiritual progressive.
And I think what he really channels is like the id of the Democratic resistance that wants to see kind of Republicans rhetorically punched in the face.
Agree.
Probably actually literally sometimes.
Yeah.
And so people loved his interview with Hannity where he really gave it to Hannity. It doesn't matter like kind of what the response is in some of these debates. What I'm realizing is that people just want kind of mean and clever things said to the face of the opposition, no matter what the opposition, like the opposition can have a great retort or not. But as long as you kind of throw that first punch, then people are like, yeah.
I mean, I want these sort of ideas to clash in public as much as humanly possible. I know I've talked about this before, like the famous Jon Stewart moment where he told Tucker Carlson and Paul Begala that Crossfire was like ruining America, and everyone sort of clapped and cheered and said, this is exactly what we needed. I've always disagreed with that. I think it's not helpful to push these conversations and to not be able to model public debate, even among people who disagree with each other, who hate each other, and even among people who get really theatrical with it and make it into a show. I mean, I think that's important for the public to see. I think it's important for people in politics to be able to do, like even just going through the motions. I think is important, and to see the clash of ideas, I think is important. So I'm glad that they're doing it, but it's extremely weird. And I think it just speaks to the fact that Gavin Newsom knows that anything could happen to Joe Biden at any given moment. Ron DeSantis knows that. He knows the same thing could be true of Donald Trump, who is facing 4 indictments.
That's true. Everyone's just hanging out, hoping.
And people are desperate.
Hoping for the worst.
Desperate to find anything that just completely removes Donald Trump from the race, at least his name from the ballot, even though he would still loom heavily over the race. So that's where we are right now. Nobody likes the situation between the presidential matchups, and I really also don't think anybody likes the situation between Newsom and DeSantis. But this is what we get. Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.
Help us build independent news and get the full show every morning at breakingpoints.com.